This is going to take a long time to fix this situation. It's going to take a long time. The narrative on the Ukrainian conflict, the narrative is going to take a long time to dismantle, because we are, although we are many and we have a lot of great alternative sources of information, media outlets, the mainstream machine, the international corporate media machine, is massive. But it's not impossible. It's been done before. We did it with Syria. It took 7 years. It took 7 years to collapse the mainstream narrative in Syria. I'm prepared to dig in for the long haul on this. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to push like we want it yesterday. And everybody needs to kind of play a role in that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're told that we're not at war with Russia. Our governments are saying we're not at war with Russia. But every single action, every single policy says the opposite, that they are committed to war with Russia. If we weren't at war with Russia, why is Russian media banned in this country, in France, in Germany? You can't access it on the internet. It's been banned from ISPs. RT, you can't watch. You can watch it on a few video sharing platforms, but it's off everything else. Why is that a problem? Think about it. You have elected officials deciding on policy to do with this war, to do with NATO's incremental expansion. It is a proxy war. This is the perfect definition of a proxy war in history. There's never been a bigger, more well-funded proxy war than the one that we're seeing now. So we have elected officials that don't even know what the official Russian position is from their foreign minister, because Russian media is completely blacked out in Europe, in NATO member states. That's a problem. That means you can't have any diplomacy. They don't know their side of the position. And so how could you possibly chart a path forward? How can you prepare for any peace negotiations? That should be the dead giveaway. They don't want any peace negotiations. Not for until what? Until when? Nobody knows. Okay? The censorship is a big problem. It's a big, big problem. They don't trust that you can tell the difference between what's factual and what's not, and what's, quote, propaganda, or what's Russian disinformation. They don't trust the marketplace of ideas that we're told that is thriving in our democracies in the West, where we can, have debates and compare information. You're not allowed to have that. The government is stepping in to censor, to control speech, to throttle the ability for your posts on social media to promulgate based on what? An arbitrary standard that just because what you're saying, what fact you're putting out is somehow matching what Russian media is saying, therefore it's Russian disinformation, even though it's 100% factual. This is the type of thing that you would see in Soviet Russia back in the day. We have those policies now implemented in our governments in Europe. This is a problem. So they're saying no ceasefire. No ceasefire, no peace negotiations until such a time that Ukraine is doing better in the war, and then maybe we think that they'll be in a better place to have more leverage for peace negotiations. And I'm also told that until Ukraine recovers its 1991 borders and Russian troops leave Ukraine, then people say it's simple. If you want peace, Russian troops need to leave Crimea, they need to leave the Donbass, they need to leave Kherson, they need to leave Zaporizhia, and then we can have peace negotiations. That day will never come, because that horse has already bolted. So I'm being realistic, we're being realistic about it, but the narrative coming from our political leaders is not realistic. It's almost like they're carrying on in a fantasy land where they have the ultimate business model for weapons sales. No sacrificing NATO troops, but endless supply of arms, refilling NATO member states, getting rid of all the Soviet arms from Eastern European countries, and replacing them with brand new American jets, brand new German tanks, okay? NATO is a giant protection racket. Yeah. That's what it is. They're saying United States and Britain are at the top of that protection racket. America, Britain is the brains, America is the muscle. They're partners. Just like a mafia, organized crime, cartel, this is how NATO is behaving behind the veneer of respectability in Brussels. They are operating like an international protection racket. Buy your weapons from us and we'll protect you. Don't trade with him, you can't buy from him, buy from them. No, buy from us. It's a little more expensive, but if you buy from us, we'll protect you. Is this not what's happening right now in Europe? This is exactly what's happening. So I can't emphasize the crass, the craven attitude, the immorality of saying, well, we'll keep supplying weapons as long as those brave Ukrainians want to fight. And who decides whether Ukraine still wants to fight? Is it the people of Ukraine? When is the election? We're told there are no more elections in Ukraine until further notice, until the war is over. So how long is this going to be? We're there to protect democracy in Ukraine, yet there's no democracy in Ukraine. The next election would be a referendum on this proxy war in Ukraine. And they're saying, yes, but the polling shows that overwhelmingly 66 or 68% of Ukrainians want to keep fighting the Russians. So we're making this decision based on polling? And who are they polling? People outside Ukraine or inside Ukraine? It's not 100% clear. Is this what we've come to? That we're running, pushing the world towards a third world war based on polling in a country that is disintegrating as we speak. The longer this war goes on, the smaller Ukraine is going to become. They had a chance to negotiate a year and a half ago, and they were told no. They were cajoled out of that. Britain and the U.S. made sure that didn't happen. They had two opportunities through the Minsk Accords, 8 years, to negotiate a settlement to prevent this war from happening. And the European powers that were there to guarantee it sandbagged it. And they've even admitted that, Francois Hollande and Angela Merkel, and to buy time to arm Ukraine up to NATO standard. And they're planning a Tet offensive against Donbass. This is beyond debate. This is fact. Russia intervened. They could have intervened early. They intervened in February of 2022. So they're saying that, this is a war of choice for Russia. This is Putin's war of choice. That Vladimir Putin woke up one day and wanted to rekindle the glory of the former Soviet Empire on February 24th, 2022, and ignore anything that happened before that date on the timeline. That's how narrow and how small the narrative that's been constructed for us to navigate this issue through a very small and narrow frame argument by our governments, by our mainstream media. The fact is, there was a violent coup in 2014 by the United States, by the EU. That's a fact, non-negotiable. It happened. And the government in Ukraine undertook a policy of lustration. They excommunicated politically the eastern provinces in Ukraine. They discriminated based on Russian language, Russian ethnicity, etc. When you have violent coups and when you have discrimination, when a federal state or a democratic state treats people differently based on their race or language and discriminates and even marginalizes and oppresses them, you have civil wars in history. And many times when you have a civil war, you have the breakup of a country. This has happened many times, and Washington should know, and London should know, because they've exacerbated many of those situations throughout history. So they know exactly what civil wars and breakup of states are and why they happen. And this is exactly what has happened with Ukraine. It is unfortunate, but they had opportunities to mitigate this, and they decided not to, because this war was planned. This war was planned well in advance. All the signs point to that as a fact. The sanctions were not dreamt up overnight. To embargo Russia, the world's largest overall commodity producer on many different categories, you can't just cancel them overnight. This was planned well in advance to balkanize the global economy, to divide economies, to drop an iron curtain, an economic and a political iron curtain. But what side of the iron curtain are we on in this story in the West? Which side are we on? Not the right side. So, think about this. When NATO was created, think about this. When NATO was created, the Secretary General, Lord Hastings Ismay, the British first Secretary General, 1953, I believe, 54, he said the purpose of NATO was to keep the Americans in, to keep the Russians out, and to keep the Germans down. They're talking about Europe. What exactly has changed since 1954? That's exactly what you're seeing now. The German economy has been taken down. European economy is being taken down. The Russians are out of the European trade and political relations and economic trade. The United States is running European economic and foreign policy along with Britain. It's exactly as it was post-World War II. Think of this as the second round of that exact same process. That is history, and we're living it, reliving it. And lastly, they say that Russia annexed Crimea, and that Russia's annexed Donetsk and Lugansk and these other republics, and that this is a violation of the UN Charter. This is a violation of international law. Since when has the United States or its allies ever been interested in international law? Because I can't remember when that was. But suddenly, the Russians have tainted the sacred doctrine of the UN Charter. The United States has been illegally occupying Syria since 2017. They weren't invited to be in there. They're there to create a breakaway state in northeastern Syria with their Kurdish paramilitary allies. Okay? No, not a word of this in the international media. No grandiose speeches at the UN. Nothing. So 2 sets of rules, and they apply international law as and when it's convenient. Okay? Crimea used to be part of Russia in 1953. It was then gifted to Ukraine as a political gesture, then by Nikita Khrushchev. It is ostensibly, and by all intents and purposes, historically, it is Russia. Okay, so it's been reunited with Russia. You can argue about this, and they can say, well, that's not fair. You can't just go and grab land. And I say, and especially not in Europe, we don't change the borders in Europe. Well, that all went out the window with the Yugoslavian war that NATO prosecuted in the 1990s. And a piece of Serbia that was torn off, the last act of NATO was to create Kosovo. And I contend, by international law, the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk qualify under international law according to the UN Charter, Article 1, more than Kosovo does. It's a better case by the book, and one day that will be adjudicated at some point in the future. It is a stronger case. They were being attacked militarily by a Ukrainian army, armed and commanded essentially by the United States and its NATO allies. Okay? That's a fact. So if they want to talk about this conversation and hold up these these virtuous standards of international law. The right to self-determination is legitimate in those circumstances in eastern Ukraine. This is just the way I believe that history is going to eventually view it. That is not the case with Yugoslavia. So we need to be consistent. This isn't whataboutism. This is historical fact. These are the arguments that we need to make to bring this conflict to an end in some kind of resolution. And not everybody is going to get what they want. They rarely do in these situations. But to continue on this road is pure madness. And the costs are going to mount. And it will not be confined to the area of Ukraine. The longer this goes, the risk, we're playing with fire on a level that we've never done before. Post-World War II is very dangerous. I don't have to explain that to everybody here. You know. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to start talking and really communicating about this with our friends, with our colleagues, with our family, not just on social media, but in the real world, in more gatherings like this. So anyway, that's what I'm saying today. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.